What happens when Hollywood's most iconic action hero meets daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe the explosive confrontation that unfolded last night when Harrison Ford sat down with the View hosts, only to find himself under attack from the very people who invited him on their show. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a complete ambush that left one of America's most beloved actors walking out in disgust. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these hosts crossed every line imaginable with their so-called journalism. The atmosphere in the View studio was already charged as Harrison Ford made his entrance to promote his latest project. What should have been a routine publicity appearance quickly transformed into something far more sinister. The 81-year-old actor, known for his no-nonsense approach both on and off screen, had no idea he was walking into what could only be described as a carefully orchestrated hit job. Joy Behar opened the segment with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm, welcoming Ford with the kind of warm smile that has become her trademark. "Harrison, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. We're all huge fans of your work, from Han Solo to Indiana Jones. You've given us so many incredible characters over the years." Ford, settling into his chair with the measured grace of someone who had done thousands of interviews, nodded politely. "Thank you for having me. It's always nice to be here." But Whoopi Goldberg's expression suggested this wasn't going to be the typical celebrity love fest. Her eyes had that steely look that regular viewers recognize as the prelude to confrontation. "Harrison, before we talk about your new work, I think we need to address some things that have been bothering a lot of people lately." The veteran actor's eyebrows raised slightly, a subtle sign that his defensive radar was already activating. "I'm sorry, what things exactly?" Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her voice taking on the prosecutorial tone that had made her a formidable legal commentator. "Well, there's been a lot of discussion about some of your past comments regarding certain political issues, and frankly, some of our viewers are concerned about the message you've been sending." Ford's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Anyone who knew him well could see the warning signs. The slight shift in posture, the way his hands moved to grip the arms of his chair. "I think you might need to be more specific. I've been pretty clear about my positions on various issues over the years." Alyssa Farah Griffin jumped in with the kind of aggressive energy that had become her signature move. "Harrison, you've been very vocal about climate change, which is great, but at the same time, you own multiple aircraft and have a pretty significant carbon footprint. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Ford's face remained impassive, but those who knew him could see the storm building behind his eyes. "I think that's a pretty simplistic way to look at a complex issue. I've been an advocate for environmental causes for decades, and I've put my money where my mouth is in terms of supporting conservation efforts." Sarah Haynes, sensing blood in the water, pressed further. "But Harrison, when you're flying private jets to climate conferences, doesn't that kind of undermine your credibility? I mean, regular people are being told to change their lifestyles, while celebrities like you continue living however you want." Ford's response was measured but carried an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "I think you're missing the point entirely. The work I do in conservation has a real impact. I've helped protect millions of acres of rainforest. I've funded research that's making a difference. If taking a plane to get to those meetings means I can save an ecosystem, then yes, I'll take that plane." Whoopi shook her head dismissively. "But that's exactly the kind of elitist thinking that turns people off. You're basically saying the rules don't apply to you because you're doing important work. How is that different from any other wealthy person who thinks their cause justifies their excess?" The temperature in the room was rising, and Ford was clearly becoming uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. His publicist, sitting just off camera, was making barely perceptible hand gestures, trying to signal for a change of topic. But the View hosts were just getting started. Joy Behar, with a laugh that carried no warmth, added her voice to the pile-on. "And let's be honest, Harrison, some of your recent interviews have been pretty prickly. You seem angry a lot of the time. Are you okay? Because some people are wondering if maybe it's time to consider retirement." Ford's eyes flashed with genuine anger for the first time since the interview began. "Excuse me? Are you seriously questioning my mental state on national television?" Sunny Hostin held up her hands in a gesture that was meant to appear conciliatory. but came across as condescending. We're not questioning your mental state, Harrison. We're just observing that you seem less patient with the press than you used to be. And given your age, people naturally wonder about these things. The insult was barely veiled, and Ford's face darkened. Given my age? What exactly are you implying here? Sarah Haynes tried to backtrack, but only made things worse. We're not implying anything negative. It's just that you're 81 years old, and sometimes older actors. Sometimes older actors what? Ford interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. Sometimes they what exactly? Alyssa Farah Griffin, apparently oblivious to the dangerous ground they were treading, pressed on. Sometimes they become less willing to engage with criticism, less open to different perspectives. We've seen it with other actors your age. Ford was now sitting forward in his chair, his famous intensity fully engaged. Are you comparing me to other actors? Are you suggesting I'm some kind of difficult old man who can't handle criticism? Whoopi, rather than de-escalating, seemed to double down. Harrison, we're not trying to attack you. We're just having a conversation. But you have to admit, your responses to some legitimate questions have been pretty dismissive lately. Legitimate questions. Ford's voice carried a dangerous edge. Is that what you call this ambush? Because that's what this feels like, an ambush disguised as an interview. The hosts exchanged glances, and viewers could sense that something was about to go very wrong. The tension in the studio was palpable, with camera operators and crew members shifting uncomfortably as they witnessed what was clearly becoming a disaster in real time. But the hosts weren't backing down, and what happened next would push Harrison Ford to his absolute breaking point. Joy Behar, seemingly energized by Ford's visible discomfort, leaned back in her chair with a smug expression that suggested she was just getting warmed up. Harrison, you know what? Let's talk about something else that's been bothering people. Your support for certain political candidates over the years. You've been pretty vocal about your liberal views, but some of your movies seem to celebrate exactly the kind of American militarism that progressives usually oppose. Ford's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you seriously psychoanalyzing my film choices right now? Do you think actors personally endorse every action their characters take? Whoopi jumped back in, her voice taking on an almost accusatory tone. But, Harrison, you can't deny that playing characters like Jack Ryan and all those action heroes, you're basically selling American imperialism to audiences around the world. How do you reconcile that with your supposedly progressive politics? The veteran actor's hands were now gripping his chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Supposedly progressive? What does that even mean? Are you questioning the sincerity of my political beliefs because I've played fictional characters in movies? Sonny Hostin, with the precision of a prosecutor going in for the kill, pulled out a tablet and began reading. Well, let's look at some quotes. In a 2019 interview, you said that people who don't believe in climate change are willfully ignorant. That's pretty harsh language for people who might just have different perspectives based on different information. Ford's face was now flushed with anger. Climate change isn't a matter of perspective, it's scientific fact. And yes, at this point, if you're denying overwhelming scientific evidence, that is willful ignorance. Alyssa Farah Griffin pounced on his response like a predator sensing weakness. But Harrison, don't you think that kind of attitude is exactly what's wrong with political discourse today? You're basically calling millions of Americans stupid for having concerns about climate policies that could affect their jobs and their communities. I never called anyone stupid, Ford shot back, his voice rising again. But I will call out misinformation when I see it, and I won't apologize for standing up for science. Sarah Haynes, with a condescending smile that would have been infuriating to anyone, shook her head slowly. But Harrison, that's exactly the kind of Hollywood elitism that regular people find so off-putting. You live in a bubble of wealth and privilege, and then you lecture working-class Americans about their priorities. Ford was now visibly shaking with rage. A bubble? I've been working since I was a teenager. I was a carpenter before I was an actor. I know what it's like to work with my hands and worry about paying bills. Don't you dare lecture me about understanding working people. The hosts exchanged knowing looks, clearly pleased with themselves for getting such a strong reaction. Whoopi, sensing the moment was ripe for the kill shot, leaned forward with predatory intensity. Harrison, we're just pointing out some contradictions. You talk about caring for working people, but you support policies that many working people oppose. You talk about environmental responsibility while living a lifestyle that produces more carbon emissions in a month than most people produce in a year. Ford's voice was now trembling with barely controlled fury. You want to talk about contradictions? Let's talk about this show. You sit here every day claiming to represent women's voices, but you spend your time tearing down guests who come here in good faith. You claim to care about important issues, but you turn everything into cheap gotcha moments for ratings. Joy Behar's face hardened. Excuse me? We're asking legitimate questions about your public statements. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Legitimate questions. Ford's voice cracked with indignation. You ambushed me with personal attacks disguised as journalism. You questioned my mental capacity because of my age. You called my political beliefs fake. You accused me of hypocrisy based on strawman arguments. None of this is legitimate. Sunny Hostin, with the cold efficiency of someone used to destroying witnesses, pressed her advantage. Harrison, we're simply holding you accountable for your own words and actions. That's what journalism is supposed to do. If you find that uncomfortable, maybe you should examine why. Ford was now on the edge of his seat, his face red with rage. Accountable? You want to hold me accountable? Where's your accountability for the damage you do to public discourse every single day? Where's your accountability for turning important issues into reality TV drama? Sarah Haynes tried to interrupt, but Ford was on a roll now. You sit here and claim moral authority while you practice the worst kind of tabloid journalism. You tear people down for sport and call it public service. You're everything that's wrong with media today. Alyssa Farah Griffin, apparently oblivious to how badly this was going, decided to throw more fuel on the fire. Harrison, that's a pretty serious accusation. Are you saying we're fake news? Because that sounds like something we've heard from certain politicians who don't like being challenged. Ford's eyes blazed with fury. Are you seriously comparing me to politicians you don't like just because I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior? That's exactly the kind of cheap shot I'm talking about. Whoopi, now clearly annoyed that her guest wasn't rolling over, decided to escalate further. Harrison, you came on our show. Nobody forced you to be here. If you don't like our questions, you're free to leave. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ford stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled breathing. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras and lights. Everyone present could sense that they had just witnessed a line being crossed, from which there might be no return. Ford's voice, when he finally spoke, was deadly quiet. Are you throwing me off your show? Joy Behar, apparently feeling emboldened, shrugged with theatrical nonchalance. We're just saying that if you can't handle adult conversation about your public statements, maybe this isn't the right forum for you. Ford slowly stood up from his chair, his movement deliberate and controlled in the way that only comes from years of stage and screen experience. Every eye in the studio was locked on him as he reached up and began removing his microphone, with steady hands that betrayed none of the rage burning behind his eyes. Adult conversation, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly throughout the silent studio. Is that what you call this character assassination? The hosts suddenly seemed to realize that their ambush had backfired spectacularly, but it was far too late to salvage the situation. What happened next would be replayed on social media for years to come. Ford's microphone pack hit the table with a definitive thud that echoed through the stunned silence of the studio. The sound seemed to snap everyone back to reality, but the damage was already done. The man who had faced down Nazis as Indiana Jones and survived carbon freezing as Han Solo was now channeling that same steely resolve into what would become the most devastating takedown in daytime television history. You know what? Ford said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected leading men. I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've dealt with difficult directors, demanding producers, and hostile press. But I have never, and I mean never, encountered such unprofessional, disrespectful behavior disguised as journalism. Whoopi Goldberg, perhaps realizing the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before her, attempted damage control. Harrison, please, let's just take a breath here. We can start over. We didn't mean for things to get so, no. Ford cut her off with the kind of finality that brooked no argument. There is no starting over. You can't unring this bell. You invited me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with personal attacks, questioned my mental capacity, and then had the audacity to suggest I leave when I defended myself. This isn't journalism, it's a hit job. Joy Behar, still clinging to her smug demeanor despite the obvious catastrophe, tried one last desperate move. Harrison, you're being overly dramatic. We ask tough questions of all our guests. It's what we do. Ford turned to face her directly, and the look in his eyes was something that veteran Hollywood observers would later describe as the most intense they had ever seen from the normally reserved actor. Tough questions? You want to know what a tough question looks like? Here's one. How do you sleep at night knowing you've turned what should be an important platform for women's voices into a circus designed to humiliate guests for entertainment? The silence that followed was deafening. Camera operators shifted uncomfortably behind their equipment. Producers offstage were frantically making hand signals. Even the studio audience, usually ready with applause or gasps at the appropriate moments, seemed frozen in shock. Sunny Hostin, her prosecutorial instincts finally kicking in to recognize a losing battle, tried a different approach. Harrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We respect your work and your activism. Maybe we could respect. Ford's laugh was bitter and cold. You've shown me nothing but disrespect from the moment I sat down. You attacked my character, my beliefs, my age, my mental capacity, and my career choices. You turned my interview into a trial where I was guilty before I even opened my mouth. Sarah Haynes, looking genuinely distressed for the first time since the interview began, made one final attempt at reconciliation. Harrison, please don't leave like this. We can edit this out. We can start fresh. Ford's response was swift and merciless. Edit it out? So you can pretend this never happened? So you can continue your pattern of ambushing guests without consequences? Absolutely not. I want every second of this broadcast exactly as it happened. Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been silent since Ford stood up, finally found her voice. Harrison, you're making a mistake. Walking out like this will only make you look bad. Ford paused at that, turning to face her with an expression that was equal parts amusement and pity. Make me look bad? To whom? To people who think this kind of behavior is acceptable? To viewers who enjoy watching respected guests get torn apart for entertainment? I think I can live without their approval. He began gathering his things, a water bottle, his phone, the small notepad he'd brought to remember talking points about his project. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and completely confident. There was no rushing, no dramatic gestures. Just the steady, methodical actions of a man who had made his decision and was sticking to it. Whoopi made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Harrison, please, we're live. Think about what this looks like. We can work this out. Ford stopped and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home with the kind of direct, honest communication that had made him a beloved figure for decades. To everyone watching at home, I want you to know that I came here today in good faith to talk about my work and the causes I care about. Instead, I was subjected to a coordinated attack designed to make me look foolish and hypocritical. This is what passes for journalism on this show, and I won't be part of it. He turned back to the hosts, his expression now one of profound disappointment rather than anger. You had a chance to have a real conversation about real issues. Instead, you chose to score cheap points and create drama. You've disrespected not just me, but your audience, who deserve better than this tabloid garbage. Joy Behar, her composure finally cracking, snapped back with venom. Fine, walk out. But don't expect anyone to feel sorry for you. You're a privileged old man who can't handle being challenged. Ford stopped dead in his tracks. The entire studio held its breath. When he turned around, his face carried an expression of such withering contempt that several crew members later said they felt physically uncomfortable just witnessing it. Privileged old man. He repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. You know what? You're right about one thing. I am privileged. I'm privileged to have had a career that allowed me to work with talented, professional people who treated others with dignity and respect. I'm privileged to have learned that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. And I'm privileged to have enough self-respect to walk away from people who mistake cruelty for cleverness. He straightened his jacket and looked one final time at each of the hosts. I genuinely hope that someday you'll understand the damage you do not just to your guests, but to the very concept of civil discourse. But I won't hold my breath. With that, Harrison Ford turned and walked toward the exit with the kind of dignity that can't be taught or faked. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio as he made his way past stunned crew members and speechless producers. The camera followed him until he disappeared through the backstage door, leaving behind a panel of hosts who were finally, for perhaps the first time in their careers, completely speechless. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Whoopi finally found her voice. We'll be right back after this break. But even as they cut to commercial, everyone in that studio knew that something fundamental had just changed. The View had pushed too far, and Harrison Ford had shown them exactly what happens when you mistake a gentleman's patience for weakness. The veteran actor had delivered a masterclass in dignity under fire, and in doing so, had exposed the ugliness of what daytime television had become. The confrontation was over, but the impact would be felt for years to come. Social media would explode with support for Ford's stance. Think pieces would be written about the incident, and The View would never quite recover from the moment they tried to take down Han Solo and discovered that some heroes don't go down without a fight. Ford's dramatic exit wasn't just the end of an interview. It was a statement about integrity, respect, and the courage to stand up to bullies, no matter how big their platform. In walking away, he had won the most important victory of all. He had kept his dignity intact while exposing theirs as nothing more than a carefully constructed facade.